Hello, friends. John M. from Sober Speak here, and this today is a special episode. I'm going to release this one during the middle of the week. Generally speaking, I will release new episodes, that is, on Saturday, and this is going to be something I call Blast from the Past. I may start to do this more often, don't know yet, but I want to see how it goes over. So what I have noticed lately is that we have tons and tons of new listeners lately, but I noticed that they will, generally speaking, only go back 4 or 5 episodes once they subscribe to the show. And therefore, folks are missing some of our earlier release contents. And today I'm going to be re-releasing an episode that we previously recorded. This is episode number 8. It is called Sumera S, From Islam to Recovery. And what you're going to notice as you listen to this, by the way, if you've already heard this, when I say this, if you've already heard this episode in the past, you can either want to do things, either listen to it again, because I had to go back and listen to it again to get ready for this, and I had forgotten many things, and I was actually there for the recording. So you can either just go on to the next episode, or you can go through and listen to it again. But for those of you who have not heard Sumera S before, by the way, her name is Sumera, Sumera. You're going to love her accent, and she will start out by telling you that she is an absolute unique mix. And by unique mix, she means she's Pakistani. She's an immigrant here in the U.S. She is of Muslim descent, and she is a woman from the United Kingdom, right here in the great state of Texas. And she's going to let you know how she ended up landing up here. But some of the things that we get into during the episode itself are, number one, her Islamic upbringing. And we kind of go into some real detail on this. And I thought, for me, it was absolutely fascinating. She talks about the Pakistani culture. She talks about things like honor killings. She talks about forced marriages, the difference between forced marriages and arranged marriages. She talks about the Islamic school that she attended as a child. She talks about her father, some of his violent tendencies, and probably the most captivating part of the entire episode is when she discusses her. How do you say this? Well, let me put it this way. Her family set up a trip to Pakistan with her when she was 17, and she'd begun to go off the rails a little bit in terms of her family involvement, if you will, and maybe kind of coloring outside the lines a little bit. In other words, she had a little bit of a wild streak in her, and so her family set up a trip to Pakistan, and unbeknownst to Sumera, the trip was really set up to get Sumera into what is called a forced marriage. And from that point on, once they figured out what the trip was for, once she was inside of Pakistan, she had to escape on a motorcycle during the sunrise morning Muslim prayers. And at that point, Amnesty International got involved. The British Embassy was involved. It truly is like a scene from a movie. And it's just absolutely incredible. But you're going to learn also after she got back from after she did escape, and I'll let her tell that story of how she got out, but after she did escape, she kind of went into a depression and she had a suicide attempt. But ultimately, she got into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and had to learn how to create a new God of her understanding, and had to unpack all that she had learned as a kid. And I found it interesting that she was drawn to cathedrals to sit there and to basically kind of meditate on her own conception of God. We talk a lot about how she had to pick out a sponsor, and then she takes a quick swim through the steps and kind of gives her version of what she perceived the steps to be and what they are today. And then ultimately we end with the tender story of the amends that she made with her father, a father who felt that Sumera had brought shame to the family through her actions. And it's just a beautiful scene. So I hope you enjoy Sumera's story. God bless. And here's Sumera. Bye-bye. Hello, friends, and welcome to episode number 8 of Sober Speak. I'm going to start today with a reading, and this is from February 26th in our book, Daily Reflections. AA is no success story in the ordinary sense of the word. It is a story of suffering transmitted under grace into spiritual progress. And that is from As Bill Sees It on page 35. We're glad you are all here. As Sober Speak, you will find podcasts of people sharing their story of recovery, much like in a speaker meeting. These are men and women who would tell us their experience, strength, and hope, centered around the 12 steps of recovery. My name is John M. I'm an alcoholic, and I will be the host of this episode number 8. We welcome all your comments. You can get in touch with us at soberspeak.com, or just send me your comments directly at John, John, at soberspeak.com. Remember, Sober Speak is a self-supporting through our own contributions. We are not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. We do not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorse nor oppose any causes. Please remember, we don't speak for any 12-step community. We represent only ourselves. We are here to share our experience, strength, and hope of recovery. For those who wish to come along for the ride, take what you want and leave the rest behind. So I am sitting here today with a lady that I had met recently. I guess, what is it, Samara, like a week or two ago now, right?
Yeah.
About a week or so. Samara came to our group, the home group that I go to here in Texas, and she gave her story, and I was absolutely mesmerized by it. And so I went up afterwards, and I asked her if she would come by and be part of the podcast, and she graciously agreed to do such. So, first of all, Samara, let me... I'll say this, they're going to notice as soon as you start talking that you got a little bit of you're not from Texas, I'll put it that way. So
exactly.
why don't you tell everybody where you are from, Samara,
okay.
And we'll just start there.
Sure. My name is Samara, and I am an alcoholic.
Thank you.
I am originally from England. I was born in Leicester, which is in the East Midlands. And then I spent about 6 years in London before I moved to Dallas, Texas. And London is actually where I got sober.
Wow. So by the way, this is as a side note. I think I told you this before. My mom is actually from Scotland. She grew up in Glasgow, the metropolitan city of Glasgow. And I'm just kind of kidding because it's
the skag capital of the UK. Yeah.
The skag capital, right? Yeah, I've heard it's a little bit rough.
It's rough is one word.
Yeah.
If you want to do an understatement, really. But you know what? Strong recovery there. It's frontline stuff. It's really strong. Really? Some strong groups there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. I haven't been back as an adult, and I would like to go back there and visit that place. But okay, so you were born there, and so I know also that you so. I know from listening to your story, right? I don't know a ton about you, but just at 45 minutes, an hour that I was able to listen to your story, I know that you are, and we talked a little bit about this on the phone, you are a unique mix for here in America. Yeah. So why don't you describe that unique mix for the audience so they can get a flavor?
Sure. So I moved here in 2016, which was, as a lot of my Brit friends said, was probably the worst time to move to America because I'm an immigrant, a woman of colour from an Islamic background, which kind of is the worst mix you could be, I guess. But never mind. I'm here now. They didn't throw me out of the country, so it's okay. So
let me ask you this. So come, and I'm here, right? I don't have to be concerned about getting here and all that sort of. What's the process like? Was it easy? Was it difficult?
It was rough, actually. It was a long, it didn't take as long as a lot of people that go through an immigration process. But I went through, and I came through as a fiance visa, but that will elaborate on later in the story. But it was, I had to have a clean record basically, and by God's grace, in my drinking, I never got arrested, never got a DUI. I actually only got my driver's license here in the United States like about a year ago. So, because there was no reason for me to drive in England, and I had no passion to do it.
So there's a trash TV that I've actually been kind of addicted to over the last year. This one's called a 90-Day Fiancé.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I watched that addictively before I came to the United States, I have to admit. The process was just a lot of paperwork. It's just a lot of paperwork, and most of it was jargon. So if you want to do it the easy way, you get a lawyer and they do all the work for you, but of course that costs money. I mean, we did that. And you can, file the paperwork yourself, but it's just a minefield, complete minefield. But I had to go through medical exam. I had a doctor check me out. I had to go and have an interview, and the interview wasn't really an interview. It was just me standing at the desk, and the guy said, what did he ask me? He asked me if my future husband had any siblings. He asked what the first name of my future father-in-law was. And actually, funnily enough, I forgot. I just had an absolute memory block. Like, it just went blank. And he goes, so what is his name? And I went,
oh no.
Oh no. And it just started laughing. And the guy just kind of looked at me and laughed. But, the lawyers just said it's an open and shut case, really. It's not complicated. I'm not a 19-year-old Thai woman that's marrying an 8-year-old American guy. Right. That looks a little bit weird. So it wasn't that, it could have been worse. It was basically what I'm trying to say.
Right. So, and you also referenced a little bit of your background, the neighborhood you were born in, and the mix there, and talk about that a little bit.
Well, this is an interesting city, actually. It's the 10th largest city in the UK, in England, sorry. And
I'm sorry, what's the name of the city again?
Leicester. I think you Americans mispronounce it by calling it Leicester.
Okay, gotcha.
So I'm here to correct you. It's Leicester. Please don't do that again. And that is an interesting city because it's the only city in the UK where the minority are the majority, meaning that there's a higher population of Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, and in terms of a Caucasian, it's a lot lower. And usually it's the other way around.
Yeah.
And so my mother was actually in the UK a lot longer than my father. So my mum was born in India, in Gujarat. And then her family moved to Africa, to Malawi, in a place called Lilongwe. And then when she was 11, she moved to England and was in a city down the road from Leicester called Coventry, which is a little saying we have in England, you get sent to Coventry, which basically means you're silenced.
Wow.
It's a horrible place, actually. I remember going there as a child and hating it. Now, my father, he came to the country in 1981, and he could only say yes and no. And he married my mother, and they had... So here's a difference. There's arranged marriages and forced marriages. Forced marriages, you have zero say. And arranged marriages, that you do have a say and you have chaperone dates.
Okay.
So my parents had a forced marriage.
Oh, really?
And so my father was flown over after my mum's dad. He went over to Pakistan and heard about this family. They want to do... there's a lot of hierarchy and within the Islamic community with regards to intermarrying. Like, they want you to be marry the same like for like. So if you're a Sayyid, which is apparently a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, they only want you to get married to a family member from someone who's a Sayyid, basically. So, which is quite fascinating stuff, but also, very much so rules, which is what I grew up with.
Right.
So my parents were forced into this marriage.
And just real quickly, in the community in general, is it well accepted? Do people push back on it? Is it just what they know?
Well, interestingly, with my story as well, they tried to force me into a marriage, and what was interesting about that was that year I heard a lot of stories about women having forced marriages and trying to get out of them, and some women even having honour killings. That's a really big thing. So in terms of Leicester...
and I've heard of that, but why don't you explain what an honour killing is?
So an honour killing is... with regards to the Indian culture or Pakistani culture or anything of that kind of ilk, the girl holds something which is called the izzat. Izzat is a Hindi word.
How do you spell that?
Izzat is spelled IZZAT, izzat.
Okay.
And basically she's the honour of the house.
Okay.
So it's almost like women are still a bartering system almost.
Yeah.
And so it's troublesome having to get women, like the girls of the family, married off, but you want them to go into a wealthy family and do well. And so with an honour killing, if they have disobeyed you in any way and dishonoured your family name, then they murder them. And there's been states that I've heard of women who basically, have a boyfriend, and then the family find out, and then the family disagree, and then they, there's altercations. They usually, either keep him in the house, and then if the girl rebels, then it ends in quite, in death essentially. Yeah. And there's loads of those stories that still happen. They happened a lot. I guess I was just open to hearing it because it had happened to me, and so I heard a lot of stories about that, and it is a big issue for sure. There's an issue around it. There is rebelling that happens, and some people just accept it because that's just their life.
And when the honour killing doesn't, I'm assuming, for example, in England that is against the law.
Absolutely, right? Yeah, absolutely. But if you were to be in a village in Pakistan,
nobody says anything.
Nobody says anything. And India is very fast forward in terms of like where they are culturally in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. But if you go to the village, they don't know any better. And it's the same with Pakistan. I think Pakistan's a little bit behind, but I suppose if you go to the capital in Islamabad, it's a little bit more forward thinking. So it really does depend on the area and where you are, and the education, and the geography of the country, and because if you're in a rural place, that's standard. Yeah. That is a standard practice. Right. But yeah, unfortunately it does go on.
Okay, so I got you off track a little bit there. You were talking about your parents going into a forced, or your mom going into a forced marriage.
So my mum's side of the family is Sayyid, and then and so is my father, and so that's why it was a good match in my mother's father's eyes, in that on that side of the family. So they got married in 1981, and I have one older brother, and I was born in Leicester, and growing up was pretty tough. I mean, being an alcoholic and not knowing it anyway, but also feeling very isolated and very apart from, and but also isolating myself even further.
Right.
Right. So I just didn't feel like I belonged anywhere, because when I would hang out with Indian people or Pakistani people, they would call me a coconut. They're like, you're brown on the outside, but you're white inside. I was like, okay. Thanks, guys. And then when I would hang out with white people, they would call me a Paki, which is a derogatory term from any person that's brown. Even if you're from India, Bangladesh, or Sri Lanka, you're a Paki. And I was like, okay, so I don't fit in with these people either. And then I was at home, and then I didn't feel like I fitted in with my family. And when I was a kid, I just remember I was about 7, maybe 6 actually. I was absolutely convinced that I was adopted. And I was, because I remember asking for the birth certificate. I was like, where's my birth certificate? And Mum was like, it just got stolen, all that stuff that we know when we had burglary the other week. I was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean you've lost the birth certificate? How could you lose your child's birth certificate? You should have it in a safe place. I was just adamant, because I just didn't feel like I connected to them. I couldn't connect to my brother, my mum and dad, and I just constantly felt alone.
Yeah.
And that got worse, towards the end of my drinking. Interestingly, when I started drinking, I felt like I was a part of something, right, in my mind. And then the drinks stopped working. And then all of a sudden I was back to how I was as a child, which is, I could be in a room full of people but feel absolutely and utterly alone. you know.
So, okay, so that is an interesting mix. I mean, without a doubt, I don't run into that here in the States very much at all, you know. So then, okay, fast forward me. When did alcohol start coming into your life, and when you had to have, you know, they always say alcohol is fun on the beginning with it, and then it's fun plus problems, and there's problems.
Yeah.
Take me through a short version of that.
So I went to college, and when I was 17, I started hanging out with my college friends, and they'd go down the pub because that's what you do, right? And around that age, you're like 17, 18, no one ever asked me for ID. And, you know, back in those days, it was just like easy to get a drink. And the drinking age in the UK is 18. So we'd always go down the pub after like lessons. And, you know, I started on those Alco Pop things like Bacardi Bruisers. And
what do they call Alco Pops?
Yeah, we call them Alco Pops because they're alcoholic pop. You know, we call fizzy pop. Like,
okay, gotcha.
There you go. God, I always forget sometimes when I say something, people look, their eyes glaze over because they're like, I don't know what she just said, but I'm just going to nod.
You know,
I'm just going to nod.
I've been sober for a little while, and so there are drinks that have come out. You know, there are things like Zima or whatever. You know, sometimes they just slide by me, and I thought maybe that's a new one there. So all right.
No.
So you go to the pub.
Yeah, so go down the pub, and you know, and it was, you know, it was pretty normal, I guess, in terms of like being a college student. And then I started working in a bar, and my drinking, you know, in those days, I guess it was fun, but then I was like testing the boundaries with it. And then I was like excessively drinking, and I just remember one time, like, I mean, gosh, how old was I? Probably, it was before my 18th, so I was still 17. I just remember drinking this, oh my gosh, there was this horrible drinking game, that's what it was. There was this drinking game at someone's house party, and I come in halfway through this game, I end up losing, and I have to have this pint of like random drinks that everyone had, like, you know, taken a little bit. There was like Tabasco sauce in there, there was just like juice, and there was like whiskey and like all the vile liquids that they could find in this person's like student digs was in this pint glass. And then I had to down it. And obviously I was like, I'm fine, you know, look at me, I'm great. And then literally 10 minutes later, I'm throwing my guts up and got alcoholic poisoning, and I was out for days. And, but then, you know, I did it again.
Right.
I just went and did it again. I kept on doing it. I was throwing up outside of like the windows of taxis. I was throwing up behind like, you know, bike sheds, and like at the bloody bus stop, and I remember, and sometimes, you know what, my drinking was like Russian roulette, really. It was like, there'd be days where I'd have like 2 or 3, and there'd be days where it would just be, I'd just be a nightmare, you know. I was like on a mission, just on this mission. And, you know, I'd be like with my mates, like, right, we're going to get really messed up tonight. And they're like, okay. That's kind of weird.
All right, so that's when you started drinking. So, what happened between there and when you got into recovery? I mean, well, I'm sure there's a lot. I mean, how do you make that? Just a short version of that, I guess.
Sure. So, I moved out of my parents' home when I was 17, which was like the worst thing that I could have done as a girl that was in an Islamic household.
Oh, and let me take you back. I believe the reason that you moved out, if I remember right, is because you were going into an arranged marriage. Is that?
Well, that happened just after. I actually moved out of my home because my father was extremely violent, and so he used to beat all of us, like my brother and me and my mother, and he was extremely controlling and just very angry, just really angry all the time. And, you know, the weird thing is that I also had a really great relationship with my father, and I really was like the apple of his eye. He just like adored me and would, you know, really shower me with gifts and just be very loving. And then there was this other side to him where he was just like crazed, and it was like he was possessed. I can remember thinking like, this isn't dad. This is weird. And so, you know, I'm going to college. I'm trying to be like normal, or what I think is normal, going out drinking and like dating guys and whatever, and going to the movies. And my dad was like, you can't go out. Why are you going out? Who are these people? Who's on the phone? You know, because they gave me a mobile so I could keep in touch with them. So things just got worse and worse.
So you weren't in the same house at this time,
so
right?
then I moved out, and I was living in this like shelter for like homeless kids, basically. And so dad was pretty angry about that, of course. So was mum, and the relationship was pretty fraught, actually. And then just before my 18th, my mum and dad took me to Pakistan, because they found out I was dating a white guy, that I was working in a bar, and so they disapproved of that, and they took me to Pakistan under false pretenses. Now, I'm going to say this because people were just like, well, you should have known. You know, I actually had someone say that. You should have known they might have done something like that. And you know what? As a 17-year-old kid who thought that, you know, my mum and dad were the absolute, you know, the world to me. And even though I was rebelling, and even though my father had been so violent, I was like, they would never betray me like this, though. You know, that never crossed my mind. And I guess, you know, maybe I was naive, or just, you know, I just really didn't think that they would do that. I don't know. It's just, it didn't cross my mind. And so I get to Pakistan, I get my passport taken away, and then I was under house arrest, basically, by my family. Because all my dad's family live in Pakistan. Well, back then they did. And so I was there for 10 days in total.
And you're 17 at this time, right?
Yeah, it's just before my 18th, so I was there. And that was the other issue, is that because I'm not an adult, like, they could have had me there for a while. And because of my father being a Pakistani national, you know, with regards to being able to stay there, like, it would have been indefinite. So, thank God, though, my mum actually pushed against us having dual nationality, because my dad was like, we should get them Pakistani passports. My mum was like, no, that's a bad idea. So having a British passport was my saving grace in this, because what happened was my cousin sister was actually helping me, and she felt really sorry for me. So she was phenomenal. She helped me, and she took me to the call centre. I called my boyfriend up and I said, this has happened. He's like, okay, we're going to deal with this. And then... So,
help me that, like, what's a call centre?
So a call centre is, they call it a PCO, and it's where you can go and call internationally or even locally, because people don't have phones in their houses because they're poor. So you would go to a call centre and you were able to make international calls or even local ones. So my cousin took me there so I could call back home to England. And as soon as my boyfriend found out, he was like, okay, right, we've got this. So him and his friends, they all just like got in touch with the British Embassy, Amnesty International, the local police, and they got in touch with the embassy in Pakistan. And so the guy that actually owned the call centre, he overheard the conversation that I was having on the phone, and he's like, are you okay? Like, you sound like you're in a bit of bother, because he could understand some English. And I was like, my parents are trying to force me into a marriage. And he goes, what's your nationality? I was like, I'm British. And he goes, well, then you're fine. You're okay. They can help you. And I was like, yeah, but I need to get to the embassy and I don't know how. And he was a good Samaritan. So he just said, I'll take you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, I mean, anything could have happened, but by God's grace, that guy was a good guy. And so I managed to get out.
He could have been a guy.
He could have been crazy.
Right.
But I just was so desperate to get out of there. And God had thrown this, like, person my way that I was very blessed that he walked into my life. At that point, that out of all the call centres, that guy was the one that could understand what was happening and offered his help. And so my cousin and I kind of hatched this plan. She goes, because there's 5 prayers, call to prayers in the day for the Muslims, and the earliest being Fajr. And Fajr namaz is just before sunrise. So it's really, really early in the morning, at the crack of dawn, basically.
Does everybody get up at the crack of dawn and do? I mean, if they're
devout
practicing Muslims,
if they're practicing Muslims, they'll get up at that time to pray. And so what happened was the azan was going on, the muezzin, which is basically, I guess, the preacher of the mosque, they have these speakers attached to it, and so they would do the call for prayer, and you can hear it from every corner of the city. It's pretty amazing. But as soon as that started, like, my cousin was awake, and I got up, she got up, she pretended she was doing her, washing herself for prayers, and then she unlocked the door. I get there, I just like put my shoes on and run out and run to this call centre. The guy was waiting for me. He took me on his moped all the way up to like a really kind of quite far. I think it was like an hour journey on this moped.
Wow.
Over to the embassy. Got there to the embassy and like there's this huge metal gate, and I was like, well, there's no doorbell, so kind of just like knocked on the door on this huge gate, and this armed guard like just it was like something out of a bizarre movie. But there's this like little door, and he slides it, and all you could see was his eyes. And I was like, he goes, yes. And I was like, hello, my name is Samara. I was told to come to the embassy. And he goes, oh, we've been expecting you. I was like, all right then. And then this huge gate comes open, and there's this massive complex of buildings. And then the guy that I was with that took me there, he goes, are you going to be okay? And I said, you've done enough, like I can't even thank you. And then he gets this big wad of cash out, and he goes, do you need any money? I was like, no, my God, I don't need any money from you, you've done enough, like absolutely, thank you so much. And that was it. Never saw him again.
Wow.
And then got out.
So did the cousin's sister arrange for this guy to be there on the moped?
No, like I said, he just overheard a conversation and offered his help.
Oh, that was the same guy. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I get airlifted out there 2 days later with armed guards at every point, and then I get back to England, and it was interesting because I was just in this deep depression after that.
Yeah.
And by this point my 18th birthday had happened, and I was just a mess. I really was, and I subsequently broke up with that guy, and that took me into a deeper depression, and I tried to kill myself, and here's the thing, like, it was a cry for help. I didn't really want to kill myself.
Yeah.
I didn't have the balls to do it. Right. But I also didn't have the balls to live.
Right.
It was just this horrible dichotomy of like, I hate my life, but I also can't even bring myself to die. It was just miserable. And that descended me into this like crazy pattern of drinking after that. That's when and I won't say that it took off. It didn't really just take off. I mean, it was a slow thing, but it was like drink and using drugs became my only friend through all of that. And all I was doing was suppressing the ghost of like my past, really, of and suppressing the anger that I had against my parents, and with my culture and my religion, and the religion that I denounced as a child, really. And so I was just angry. I was always angry. I came into the rooms and I was just pissed off at the world, and I had to learn through the steps to be able to let go of that, because I carried that for so long. And I got into drugs big time, so that's a huge part of my story. But ultimately, it's the drink that I started with, and it's the drink that I ended with. You know, the drugs just gave me the ability to drink more. That's all it did.
I understand that.
And so, I did it, and I did it a lot. But alcohol, that was my poison, really.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of ambled through my 20s, like, in a constant state of misery. It's the only way to describe it. It was like nothing was good enough, and nothing was like enough. I needed more of everything. And when I didn't get enough, it was just like, well, my life's terrible. God has dealt me this hand, and I guess I'm just gonna always be miserable.
The little black cloud gonna follow me around.
Gosh, it was like a black storm continually on my life. It was horrible. I mean, I was either angry at you because you had it, or I was angry at myself because I didn't have it, And I remember once hearing this woman, it was here in Dallas, actually, my home group, and it's just stuck with me. But, people talk about the grass is always greener on the other side, right? but you can always water your side.
Yeah.
Right?
That's true.
And I was like, oh my gosh, that really makes sense. Why do I want your bloody grass? I've got my bloody own, haven't I? Just got to feed it. Blimey. But I came into recovery when I was 29.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was 10 years or so, 11 years, whatever, of research, right? Debauchery.
Debauchery would be the word. And you know what? It's in the big book. It talks about the illness being progressive, right? So just before I moved to London, I went off to Southeast Asia and was teaching English out there. And I didn't drink for the time that I was there, but I was horrible to be around, and I was just crazy. You know, and it's basically what I know now as being a dry drunk, essentially. That's what I was. And so before I mean, the reason why I stopped drinking was like, well, I'm going to be going to this spiritual place and, you know, I'm going to do some yoga on the beach. I'm going to hang out with some monks and I'm going to go to all these, like, cool temples. Yeah. Like, I'm in the zone of spirituality. No. So that's not what happened. I went out there with my then boyfriend, go and dump him, and I'm like, I'm done with you, and then go and teach English at this place, and you know that was fulfilling. But you know the people that I was living with in the eco house, I was just a horrible person to be around because I was continually mad at everyone.
Eco house?
Yeah, it was this really cool place where just a bunch of people, we all volunteered to go and like stay in this house together. We used to cook together and we'd all used to teach together. And there was another group that lived in this eco house that were building the school because this was after the 2014 tsunami when it hit. So they're regenerating the area. They've been doing it for a few years. Yeah. And so we were just part of this group of volunteers that went and stayed in this house and just basically gave back to the community. Cool. And here's the thing, right? I'm doing that and it's like, what an amazing experience, right? What a cool thing to do and like a giving thing. But I wasn't giving or kind or like enjoying it. You know, I was just like pissed all the time and like picking holes in like this voluntary like huge company and go, you are not doing it right because this should happen and why is this like this and you should do this, you know. Oh gosh, what a nightmare. And I was so, you know, and I wasn't drinking at that time. And then I get back to England and I was like, right, I've got to get out of Leicester. Leicester's the problem. That's what I've got to do. Right. So I then got a job in London, and then like literally without any thought, you know, one afternoon I just like went, I'm going to move to London. That's it, and I did it.
Right.
Like I didn't have 2 pennies to rub together. I had no home. I was homeless at that point. I didn't even have a job while I came back. So it was like I just had no money. I was, like I said, homeless, no boyfriend. You know, my relationship with my family had just completely disintegrated. And I was just like, well, nobody loves me. I'm leaving. You know, this is just like, I'm leaving in a blaze of glory. They'll soon rue this day. Right. You know, I'm going to go off to London and seek my fortune, and then they'll be sorry. I don't even know who they were. Right. But I did it. And then I moved to London. So, yeah, again, like I said, I wasn't drinking, but then my first night in London, so 7 months of, like, not drinking, my first night in London, I had a pint of cider, and I went home, and that was it, and it was fine. And then I think I moved, like, on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and then that following weekend, that was it. 2.5 years of complete insanity. And this shows to me, as it talks about in the big book, the progressive, right, illness. So I went from like just ambling through, and it was just like, you know, there were consequences and there were problems and they were few and far between, but they happened. But I was just it was just the angst within me that was more overpowering than anything. And then I didn't drink for like 7 months, and then as soon as I pick it up, all of a sudden, like I'm in hell. Right. Like it had just escalated so much that, you know, I get brought to the rooms 2.5 years later, right? And so the thing that got me to the rooms really was the fact that I got suspended from my job for my behaviour. Oh my gosh. So I work in hospitality and have done for 18 years, and I was like going across this, you know, the country, opening restaurants. So my drinking was like 2 weeks in that city, 2 weeks in this city, 3 weeks in that city, a month over here. So it was, I guess, you know, people didn't really see the extent of my drinking. And I think they had an idea. They were like, I just thought you were a good time girl. You know, you just like to have a drink and have fun. But if you had been travelling with me for that entire time, you'd go, you've got a problem. There is something clearly wrong here. And I lived out of a suitcase for 2.5 years, like travelling the country and just getting drunk in every city that I was in.
Yeah.
But they got worse. Each time I opened a restaurant in a different city, the drinking got worse and worse, and the consequences became more and more, until ultimately my last drunk was in this nightclub in this little village called Chichester near the south coast of England. Really quaint little village. They didn't know what hit them when I got there. But I go to this nightclub, and I just remember probably about a total of 10 seconds worth of that night, you know, just snippets here and there. That was my last drunk. And the thing that, you know, I always refer to, which it talks about in page 6 of the big book, you know, and I really relate to this. And this is how I felt the next morning after my last drunk. And, you know, I can still feel it now. I can still... It's so tangible, that feeling. But on page 6 of the big book, it says, the remorse, horror and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. The courage to do battle was not there. My brain raced uncontrollably, and there was a terrible sense of impending calamity. Ugh, you know, that small short paragraph just absolutely nails how I felt. Impending calamity. I knew there was something incredibly wrong, and I knew that something bad was about to happen, but I just didn't know what it was, right? And I had this horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. You know, they had found out.
Right.
Who's they? I don't know.
Right.
But they have found out. So I get back to London, I get a phone call from my boss, and he's like, Samara, I really need to see you. And I was like, okay, game's up. You know, that was it. That was what went through my head. I was like, they know, the gig's up. That's it. It's over. It's over. And I went to see him. That was on a Thursday night. And he basically said to me, I have to suspend you from work. We have to do an investigation with regards to what happened when you were in Chichester. We heard some stories. And he goes, this is out of my control now. And then he said something which will always stick with me, and I'm glad it will, because it's a real stark reminder. Because it was really, it was like a dagger through the heart. And he said to me, because my boss and I had become good friends over the time, you know, that we've been travelling together and opening these restaurants. And he said to me, he goes, off the record, Samara, you know, you're such a lovely girl, but you just keep on effing things up, you know? And I was like, wow, I don't know why. I couldn't even answer that. I was like, I just didn't know. And then I walked out of that meeting, and I absolutely know this was God speaking to me. I instantly picked up my phone to call my friend, Johnny. Now, Johnny was working for the sister company of the company I was working for, so he knew all the people, and so when I said to him, hey, you know, my boss just suspended me, he's like, all right, what are you doing tomorrow night? And I said, well, nothing. And he goes, come meet me for a coffee. Now, if you rewind a month earlier, Johnny and I were having dinner one night, and he was having a lemonade. He'd been in recovery about a month. I was there with a bottle of red wine, of course. And I was regaling my stories of, you know, what I'd been up to and how I was just like living life. And he just looked at me and just said, do you think you've got a problem with alcohol? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean, problem with alcohol? I mean, what's an alcohol? I mean, no. You know, the delusion of my ism was just that I had zero idea I had a problem with alcohol. And so he planted a seed that, you know, a month earlier. So that happened. And then I get suspended from work. I call him up, and then we go meet up for a coffee the next day. So I feel like, you know, Jonathan was in my life because he's the one that 12-stepped me in the program. You know, God had a plan.
Right.
And so the next day, it was a Friday, the 17th of November, 2012. And he takes me to a newcomers meeting, and I just remember that building so well. I walked into it and it had this wood paneling. I remember it looking like a sauna, and it was called the Quaker House. So I went down this narrow passageway, and it just smelt musty, and there was this like low hum of chatter that I could hear off into this other room. I walk around the corner and there was just, everyone was jovial. Yeah. There was a guy making tea and there was biscuits there. British biscuits, not American biscuits, right. I should add.
Right.
That's what you call cookies.
That's so interesting. We have coffee and donuts.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, coffee and donuts. We're like, no, tea and biscuits, thanks. The proper way. And there's this guy there with his kettle making this like tea, and he's just like, what would you like? And I was like, just an English breakfast, please. And then took
What's an English breakfast? What does that
just
mean?
a black tea, English breakfast, black tea.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Because obviously being British, we have an array of teas. We have herbal infusions as well. Not just the standard black tea. And so it was really funny. Like, people were just happy. They just seemed happy, right? And it's the chatter that you always hear before a meeting, just before it starts. You know, when people turn up early and they, you know, and they hug each other and like, I haven't seen you for a while, how are you? That's the chatter that I got to hear. And just before the meeting started, Jonathan said, he looked around at me and he just said, listen out for the similarities, not the differences. Mm-hmm. And I was like, is he all right? Because I thought I was there for my poor little alcoholic friend Johnny, who you know has got a problem. I was just there to support him. Unbeknownst to me, Johnny was 12-stepping me into the programme. He knew I just needed to find out for myself, right? And then just something absolutely wonderful happened. That meeting, actually, it was his first meeting. Mm-hmm. So they just started that group. And the guy that was up at the front that was holding the meeting, who read out the script, an American. Mm-hmm. The guy that was sharing his story, an American. Mm-hmm. And Craig couldn't be more different to the person that, you know, I was, like, sat there. You know, I'm a young woman, you know, age 29 from this really weird background. And then here was this American guy who was, I think Craig was in his 70s or 80s, I forget now. You know, this older white guy, yeah. And he's lived a life, right? And he's been in England for quite some time now. But I just related to everything he said. Yeah. And he didn't really talk about, you know, the drunk log in terms of like, you know, I drank and I puked. It was, what I really understood about Craig was the feelings that he had. Yeah. You know, it says in the big book, the bitter morass of self-pity, quicksand stretched around me. You know, that feeling of despair, that feeling of fear, the feeling of that nothing was right. There was something inherently inside that was wrong, and I couldn't pinpoint what it was. You know, it was like Craig had reached into my mind and dragged everything out and was able to articulate it. All the stuff that I had been feeling since I was a child, all of a sudden this man was talking about. And it was just insane, you know? And I just remember feeling hopeful. Yeah. And everyone started sharing. So over there it's, you know, raised voice sharing, and all these people like, yes, I really relate to this part of the story when you said this, this and this. And I just kind of listened, and, you know, there was people from different backgrounds and ages, and I was like, wow, you know, this is really interesting. Because I just thought an alcoholic was a bold fat man that lived under a bridge, right? And I don't even know where I got that idea from, but that's the one that I had, you know? And so I was like, okay, well, this is interesting. And then, you know, after the meeting finished, the guy that was holding the meeting, he was actually Johnny's, my mate Johnny, his sponsor. I didn't know at the time that he was. He comes up to me and Ted's like, with his American accent, he goes, so, what do you think? And I was like, oh, blimey, I'm an effing alcoholic. And he's just like, Yep.
You know, you just answered an age-old question for me. I hear people over here impersonating British people all the time, people from the UK, you know, all sorts of England, Ireland, Scotland, you know, Welsh, the whole 9 yards. But I always think, how do English people impersonate Americans? And I just heard one.
Well, actually, I'll have you know, there are a lot of our actors are very good at doing American accents. But anyway, that's another story for another time. So yeah, Ted then says to me, he goes, have you thought about sponsorship? And I was like, what? And he goes, well, there's a lot of women that are sponsoring here. You should go and talk to that woman. And then pointed at this girl called Mel. And she was my first sponsor, you know. So I come in on the 17th on a Friday. The following day on Saturday morning, I got taken to a meeting by a woman from that Friday night meeting. She was holding a meeting up in North London, because I was living in North London at this time. And I go to this meeting in Belsize Park, and I absolutely loved it. I picked up my chip there, my 24-hour chip. And then that night, Saturday night, I go to a big book study in a wet house. And then Mel was there, she was greeting. And then I got chatting to her.
This wasn't Mel B, was it?
No.
I'm sorry.
There's more than one Mel. Come on, John. And so I go up to her after the meeting and I said, will you be my sponsor? I didn't even think about it. I didn't mull it over. I was just told that she sponsors, and I just went up to her and she seemed cool. Like, you know, she seemed fine. You know what I mean? It wasn't a case of like, oh yeah, I've got to have her because she's wearing the right clothes or she looks the right way. I was like, she seems normal.
Yeah.
You know? That was the only way I could describe it. She just seemed normal.
Right.
So I asked her to be my sponsor, and then we started working the steps that week.
Wow.
Yeah. And I haven't looked back.
How about that? So tell me then a little bit. So here's what I'm interested in, a couple of pieces. I've heard you talk about the chapter We Agnostics before and how important that is to you. But I'm also curious as to with your background and, you know, can you describe a little bit about your relationship with God? Is it based in, was it like building, did you have to forget about some things you had learned in the past and create a new God from the ground up? Talk to me a little bit about that.
So I gave up on Islam pretty young, actually, because whenever I would question anything, I was a real questioner as a child. And whenever I would question anything, I wasn't ever given an answer. You know, and I kind of just found it weird that I was reading a book. The Quran is in Arabic, and I was reading this book in Arabic, but I couldn't speak to you in Arabic. I couldn't read, you know, New Arabic as it is now in its form. I couldn't have a conversation in Arabic, but old scripture Arabic, the Quran, I could read fluently.
Really?
But I couldn't understand what it said. And it just was a little bit baffling, you know. And they don't teach you Arabic in Islamic schools. And, you know, half the time I was like, Islamic school, oh my gosh, wow. So Islamic school, I used to go 5 days a week after school. I'd come home from school, we'd get home, eat, wash, and then go to Islamic school 5 days a week.
And is there a different, when you say Islamic school, does that mean that is it like Catholic school where you're learning how to read and write and then you learn religion at the same time?
All you're doing is praying the Quran. So you learn your Arabic ABC, so you're able to then graduate to praying the Quran. So the Quran is really complex, and there's a few books you have to read before you're able to read that fluently. And essentially, it's kind of now that I'm about to explain this, it's such a weird concept. But what you do, you go to Islamic school to learn about Islam in terms of its stories and about you know, Muhammad the prophet and all the other prophets, and so the guy that would be the teacher would, you know, generally have a really good knowledge of that. But I went to a lot of different Islamic schools and they all ran pretty differently, but essentially this is it. Friday was the day where you would have Friday prayers, and then they would teach you about and give you lessons of Islam and the stories and the Quran. The other 4 days would be just reading. You'd go in, and when you're brand new, you'd learn the ABC of Arabic, and then you'd get another book which would teach you how to join up those letters, and it was all about the pronunciation. That's what the teacher would listen out for, is are you pronouncing that word correctly? And then once you do that, The Quran has 30 books inside, so 30 chapters within it. You start at chapter 30, which is the easiest, and also is the one that you need to be able to have your daily prayers. So the Muslims pray 5 times a day, which is when the muazzin calls for the azan, the call for prayer. Mm-hmm. And so you need the last book to be able to use those prayers in the actual 5 times a day prayer. Yeah. So you start at 30. Right. Once you've graduated from the last book in the Quran, you then go to the front of the book and go all the way through. And it's a big deal when you finish reading. But what you would get is like lessons from each class. They would give you either like 4 or 5 paragraphs to learn, and you had to go home, learn the pronunciation, get it absolutely bang on, and then go back to school and then read it to your teacher. And if you didn't get it right, you would get caned. Like, we used to get beaten with really? Sticks. And you would get punishment for that. So that was my God.
Okay.
One that I lived in fear of, and so obviously being taken to Islamic school, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. But here's the thing, I was a bit more clever than my brother. I realised at an earlier age, if I did really well at Islamic school, I wouldn't have to go anymore.
Right.
And so that's what I did. And so my brother is a year older than me, and when I finished the Quran before he did, he was really pissed at me about that. But my parents were like, look at our daughter, isn't she great? She's such a good student. And so, I learnt pretty quick,
right.
Typical alcoholic. I was like, how do I get out of this mess as quickly as possible? I'll do it. And so I just really, I just was not into Islam or religion as a whole, for a while. But then in my 20s, what was interesting is that I really was drawn to churches and cathedrals. And there's a really beautiful cathedral in Leicester, in my hometown, where actually Richard III has been buried there now after they found his body in a car park next to it. But very interesting. It's fascinating history. That's definitely for another time. But I used to go to that cathedral, by myself and just sit there, and I don't know why I was drawn to churches, but I just felt really at peace in a church. And I don't know. I don't know whether it was the architecture or whether people were friendly, or I don't know. It just really was something that through my 20s, before I came into the rooms, I would like go to services on Sundays, or I would just go in on a random day and just sit there for a while and pray. And I didn't even know what I was praying to or who to, or whether it was a Christian God. But my idea of God, I'd kind of left that, and I just didn't really have one, I guess. So by the time I got to the rooms, what was interesting is that I was open. I was like wide open for it. And so I didn't really fight against it. I didn't fight against anything. In fact, so the first woman that sponsored me, and Mel, I ended up having to change sponsors. And she's an incredible woman. Her name's Jo. And Jo was fantastic, actually, and she was pretty militant with me because I needed that. I needed someone that was a bit hard because I was so rebellious, and I'm just very opinionated, and I'm very strong-minded. And because my father, was so controlling, that's why I was even more like, I'm authority. I mean, to be perfectly honest, all alcoholics have an issue with authority, right. But, it's just like, it just reminded me of my dad, and I still needed that, someone to be strong enough to be able to tell me, these are the principles of AA. Yeah. This is how we do it. This is how we recover. This is what's in the big book. This is how we're going to do it. There's only one solution. And the thing that she said to me that was really fascinating was that I could find my own concept of God. And so after having religion shoved down my throat, after having so many rules around God, and, having to only pray to God at a certain time, 5 times a day, reading this book in Arabic that I didn't understand, but having to do it anyway, even though I didn't really relate to the language or the liturgy, none of that, I didn't get it. I just felt really separated from it. It was just something I had to do because I was born into it.
Right.
But then what AA taught me was that it didn't matter where you were from, that you could have your own concept. And because my God before was one of, like the Catholic God, fire and brimstone, I hear that quite a lot when people talk about Catholicism, and I'm like, don't worry guys, Islam is exactly the same.
Right.
And so I was really open to the idea of a God that was loving and kind, And I was told just to prick, a couple of words that you want your God to be. And I was like, that was it. Loving and kind was all I could muster up. I was like, that's my God. He's loving and he's kind.
Right.
And that was enough. And my sponsor said to me, she goes, yeah, that's a great start. That's great. And that will do.
That's right.
Because ultimately when I get to step 3, I have to hand my will and my life over to the care of God at step 2, right? And then step 3, this is where some magic happens, because I have to surrender, And it has to be a power greater than myself, because my history has proven that my own will and my own power did not work.
Mm-hmm.
So where do we find this power? The book, asks that question.
Mm-hmm.
And the key is to find a power greater than myself. So it's not within me. It's not going to be my head. So it's some sort of spiritual principle, axiom, law that's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so all I have to do at step 3 is just to be willing, right? Just to be willing, crack the door open enough, just enough that I will surrender and I'll be willing to just get on this journey. Because what happened when I came in is that I was so broken and I was so in self and miserable that I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, that I was open to the open to change, and to the suggestion that finding a power greater than myself was going to make me better. And so I didn't fight against anything. I just did as my sponsor told me to do.
So, I want to talk about. I've heard you talk about some important amends in your life before,
mm-hmm.
right? And we'll probably wrap it up with that. So, talk to me about the 9th step. Any sort of important amends that you've made throughout your life, and anyway, just why don't you go into that a little bit?
Sure. So, of course, the interestingly, with the step 4, when I did that on my mum and dad, I thought I'd forgiven them. But it turns out I just ignored it and suppressed that whole thing and just pushed it down and didn't want to look at it. And then the step 4 allowed me to look at that and also see my part. That's the most important bit, that column there, is seeing my part in it and where I was wrong. So when it came down to doing my amends, I had some incredible experiences. And my mother and I we were kind of like a little bit better than we were. It was okay, but it was, it just wasn't right.
Mm-hmm.
There was still some hurt there and some pain. And my dad, he'd actually been out of my life for a while now. By this point, he'd gone away out of the country for a couple of years, and prior to that, he when I used to go and visit him, he just couldn't even bear to look at me. He would walk out of a room if I walked in.
Right.
And even if I said hello to him, he just couldn't even answer me back. He was so ashamed of me and so
what do you
angry.
think that shame was like for him? I'm just curious. So if I were to ask him, what do you... I mean, I know you can't get in his head totally, but do you have an idea because of the culture of what he was thinking?
Well, ultimately I brought shame on the family, didn't I?
Mm-hmm.
And sullied the name. His only daughter went out, moved away, on her own, dated a white guy.
Mm-hmm.
God knows what else she's been doing.
Gotcha.
And so that also looks bad upon him. That makes him a bad father.
Gotcha.
Because I decided to go off and rebel. So the shame wasn't even carried just for like me and who I am, but also him and how he looks to the outside world.
Right.
And we don't talk about things.
Mm-hmm.
Everything on the exterior has to be perfect.
Mm.
and it has to look right to everyone, even if it isn't inside. It doesn't matter. And so that brought a lot of shame for him, and especially with his brothers. 7 brothers in Pakistan, 3 sisters, and they were like, "Oh, what's happened to her then?" And my dad, I remember, he distinctly told my family, he goes, they call me Sumi in my family, and he goes, "Sumi's dead. She's dead to me. You haven't got a daughter or a cousin or a niece. She's dead." That's how angry he was with me. And then, as I said, he went away for a couple of years, and then I was I'd finished doing my step 5 with my sponsor at her house, and I remember walking home and then very suddenly just getting a text message from my dad out of the blue, from nowhere. And it was interesting because when I was doing my step 5, I was really crying. I just bawled my eyes out when I was reading my step 5 about my dad, and how I was resentful against him. But I was crying because I realised what I had done wrong, and I felt bad actually, and I could also have empathy for him, And so after that text message, I asked Dad if he was okay, and there was a little bit of contact. And then when it finally came to doing my amends, my dad came up to London, and we hung out, and we were in the park, and it was a beautiful, beautiful summer's day, and we sat on the park bench, and I made my amends to my dad, and I said to him, "You know what, I want to make amends for the harm that I've caused you. I caused you worry, and I was unkind with my words. I was physically violent. I didn't listen to the rules that you had made in your own home and that I should have followed, and I just apologise for all that stuff." And my dad comes back with this great retort, and he goes, "Well, Samara, when you have kids one day, you'll understand what little they can be." Just insert and expletive there. But, and I was like, wow, okay. And then our relationship changed, because I changed. And what I could get from that is that, my father didn't go out to deliberately try and ruin my life as I thought he did. What he was doing was out of love.
Love, right.
He had moved into this country, and he was thousands of miles from his family that he had been with all his life, and then gets ripped out of there from his 7 brothers, 3 sisters, his mum and dad, this extended family that he'd been living with under one roof, and gets taken to this other country, marries a woman he doesn't know, can't speak a word of English, and all of a sudden, he's got these 2 kids to look after, and he has to navigate his way around,
right.
And what he was trying to do was keep a little piece of home in England. Right. That's what he wanted. He wanted us to grow up with the same culture that he grew up in, because he valued that.
Right.
That was something that was really precious to him, and he wanted to give it to us.
Right.
But of course, we lived, in a different country. We were brought up in a different place. And so for us, the values are different.
Right.
And so I was able to have empathy for him and know that my father was doing that because he cared and he wanted the best for me, And so our relationship changed because I was able to, as a result of the steps, see all of this and be loving and kind and tolerant towards him. And then Dad and I have, a great relationship. I would always go and visit him at the weekends down in Leicester, and we'd go thrift store shopping, and we'd hang out, and we'd watch Bollywood movies together. And,
Bollywood.
Yeah, old black and white ones. And he would say to me, "Sumi, you're the only one that understands. You like these movies. I like these movies too." And he'd go, "Hey, have you seen this one?" And it was the best. It was the best. And when I left England and I was coming here to Dallas, he was so upset. He was really, really upset, and he just said, "I'm going to miss you." He was like, "I don't want you to go." He's like, "Sumi, I love you."
Right.
But, I get to have that relationship because I work the steps.
Right.
You know, and I get to show up for life, and that was an amends that really, really made me see the power of God, and how AA really, really works.
Right.
You know.
Same daughter, same father,
Mm-hmm.
but something changed, and that was you.
Yeah, I mean, my dad's still the same guy. He still
understand.
gets angry about stuff, but our interaction has changed because I did.
Right. All we can do is change ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Well, listen, there's more. I could go on and on. We could go on a couple more hours. You're articulate. I love your opinions, as you call them, right? And this has just been a great time together, and I'm so glad that you came over. Maybe we could pick it up at part 2 some other time, but God bless you. Thank you for coming by, Samara. I
Thank you
sure
for
do
having me.
appreciate it. And we'll talk again soon.